Hello and welcome everybody. Today I have a special guest. He's a certified financial planner. His name is Mark Willis and he's with Lake Grove Financial Services. And also he hosts a very successful podcast called Not Your Average Financial Podcast. And I met actually Mark through a couple of real estate expos and events. And what attracted me to what he presents and talks about his topics is using alternative type of financing to get into real estate investing. I always say that you need to think outside the box about how you're going to finance your real estate instead of the conventional, bank financing. And that's why I think what Mark is going to present today is going to be definitely down our alley when it comes to that. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Laura. Glad to be on your show.
Great. So just give us a little bit of your background, how you got to become a certified financial planner and what interested you in that, and more specifically, how you like to help people to maximize their return on investment by, you know, uh, doing a good financial plan, and especially with real estate, because you showed up at different real estate events that I met you at. So, what is your philosophy about using this for your financial for real estate?
Well, real estate is not the first thing that most CFPs like myself go to for their clients. Honestly, it's a forgotten asset class for mainstream financial planners. But I'm not your average financial planner, I guess. And that's also out of my own background. I didn't go to school for finance. But when I graduated, my wife and I had $120,000 of student loan debt, and we had no plan to pay it off in the midst of the last Great Recession. Before 2020, I'll call it the last Great Recession of 2008.
Right.
And we since found a better way to build real wealth, pay off the debt in a more attractive, more compelling way than just throwing money at the problem. We actually built wealth off of our debt payments, which we can talk about. But it also really intrigued me that the traditional financial plan of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds and other retail amateur investment products like Wall Street offers us just were a house of cards in the last recession. And again, I'd say we aren't done with volatility now. I don't think anyone who's been through the year of 2020 would would think that we're done with volatility at this point. There's going to be more market cycles over your lifetime, over my lifetime. And I was just sort of asking myself as I was getting more and more interested in personal finance to say, all right, if I'm going to go into the business of helping other people develop a philosophy and a strategy to meet their financial goals, I wanted them to be able to do so without taking unnecessary risk. Now, Laura, I believe in risk. I'm an entrepreneur just like you and just like many of your listeners, but we have necessary risk and then we have unnecessary risk. And I believe, in taking smart, necessary risks, but it's the unnecessary stuff that I don't need to bother with. If I'm going to drive my family home from the grocery store, I'm not going to take the side roads on the side of the cliff with no rail guards. I'm going to take the main road that gets us there safely. I'm not going to take any unnecessary risk. And the same is true with our finances. If our aim and our goal is to reach our financial milestones without taking unnecessary risks, that's a philosophy I can get behind and sleep well at night, even as we take market share and as we build our real estate portfolios and do the smart things that we need to do to grow our wealth. So that's a bit about my background and also our philosophy for our financial firm.
Great. And like I said, you show up a lot of these real estate events, real estate expos. So definitely, I think you have something to offer to real estate investors. And one of your quotes that you say, is about how to fire your banker, right? And become your own financial source. So do you want to explain a little bit more what does that mean? And one thing you say, what happens if the bank stopped the lending? You know, we've seen this for brief periods of time with the recession that we had back 12 years ago. And even this year, when for a few weeks there was such a confusion when the pandemic started, that basically banks tightened up as far as lending, especially when it comes to investment property, real estate. So by understanding how you can become your own source of funding and fire your banker. I think that's very appealing to a real estate investor. So do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the quote by Mark Twain still holds true today in our day and age. His quote is, a banker is a fellow who will lend you his umbrella when the sun is shining, but wants it back as soon as it starts to rain."
Right.
That's the truth. When are we most likely going to need access to capital? It's during a crisis. When are banks least likely going to give it to us? During a crisis. When are we least likely able to sell our real estate for a price that it's going to truly be worth? During a crisis. So unfortunately, banks really have us by the neck, and that's their whole game. I mean, there's a great book, Laura. The book is written by David Graeber. The title is Debt, the First 5,000 Years. That's the title of the book. Now, I don't agree with everything in the book, but I love the title because it reminds me that banks are just a function of human civilization. And maybe I'll say more broadly, banking is a function of human civilization. And most people think that's the same thing, banks and banking. One is a noun, one is a verb. So nouns, the bank down the street is a picture in our minds. When I say the word bank, what comes to mind? Most of us think of, the mega banks on Wall Street or the local credit union, but banking is something that we all do. In fact, we're already in the banking business. Even if you think you're in the real estate business, or if you have a day job as a mechanic or as an engineer or as a teacher, no matter what our day job, we're all in the banking business. Banking is a function of human civilization. And if we truly grasp that concept, that we finance everything we buy, then we have a choice at that point. Once we've really discovered the truth that we finance everything, whether we pay cash for something or we use a bank to finance that car or that real estate deal, we finance everything, which I'd be happy to talk more about if you'd like, Laura. But once we realize that truth, then the only question in my mind is, well, who is doing the banking for me in my life? Is it somebody else? Is a bank down the street managing the banking function of my life? Or have I brought it back in-house? Am I banking on myself? Am I able to take the banking function back into my home and control the banking function of my life? That's one of the big rocks in the financial portfolio that we help our clients set up. Why? Because I believe banking is one of those hinges that swing the big door in your financial life. Most financial planners will obsess over how great a rate of return they may have gotten you last quarter in your 401k. I couldn't care less. Maybe it has some part to play, sure. Whether you got 7% or 8% in your mutual funds. But what really matters is the volume of interest that the average client is paying to banks, credit cards, finance companies. I mean, the average statistic that I read from the US Commerce Bureau last year, as of 2019, 34.5% of our total income goes to service debt payments, mortgages, credit cards, student loans, car loans. That's a third of our income, Laura, just going to service our debt. Even low interest debt starts to pile up when you think about the volume of interest that's going to be paid out the back door. In fact, if you put a timer on your money, if time is money, then what's 34% of your day? Especially if you factor in you're only awake for a third of your life already. So, man, the power of the banking concept couldn't be overstated. I'd say if we had one choice to make a decision about what we want to do with our life, it would be, all right, financially speaking, I want to take back control of the banking function of my life and fire my banker.
Right. Yeah, I always say that there is what we call constructive debt, and then there is like the bad debt. The bad
Right.
debt is the one where you just spend with a credit card, and there is really for a good that's not even worth it anymore as soon as you walk out the store. Where constructive debt is when you actually build wealth by creating this type of debt. And real estate is very typical of it, because if you buy right and you have a mortgage on the property, but you get rental income and appreciation and tax breaks and so forth, that's constructive debt.
Couldn't
So,
agree more. That's totally true. Yeah.
right. So then explain a little more then how. right? The how can we do this? Sounds really good, but how can the average investor say, okay, this sounds really good. I understand the concept, but how me, the average investor, can do this?
Yes, yeah, it's I agree about the constructive debt, and I would say, most of us go hat in hand to the bank, hoping and praying and begging to get that loan so that we can buy that real estate deal. That's not control. That's where the bank is still in control of me. Even if I get a constructive, a positive debt, a constructive debt, like you said, I'm still under their thumb if I come hat in hand hoping that they'll give me a loan. What would I rather do? I'd rather be the one calling on the banks and the bank coming to me hat in hand,
Right.
asking me to work with them. So I would rather use the banks for my convenience rather than let the bank use me for their convenience and profit. So let's bring it down the ladder some, Laura. I love your question. So, how do we do this? How do we take back control of the banking function in our life? As I was getting my CFP, I studied, I kept track as far as I could. It seemed like there were about 450 financial products that they tell you to learn and study and kind of just dive deep into in the real estate space and beyond. That would include stocks, bonds, mutual funds, savings accounts, trusts, charitable arrangements, annuities, everything from soup to nuts. And it was overwhelming just to get my CFP and to learn all of that. But one of the key products that came to the surface that helped me see that we could take control of the financial banking function in our life was, oddly enough, a really rare but modernized form of a very old financial asset, something that's been around for 200 years and has provided some guarantees and growth and tax advantages and liquidity. Of all things, Laura, it was a dividend paying whole life insurance contract. And it floored me because when I first stumbled across the words whole life insurance, maybe like many of your listeners, it was on a radio program for a financial infotainer whose last name rhymes with Lamsey. I'll just say that. And and he hates whole life insurance. And for him and for so many others, it was built around a very old set of talking points that are just no longer relevant for today's whole life contracts that I've seen anyway. Now, he's right, and many infotainers out there like him are right on some whole life insurance that's designed mainly for commissions and the death benefit. But yeah, allow me for 3 minutes to kind of just share what I found when I stumbled across a more modern form here. We'll call it a bank on yourself type whole life policy. So, bank on yourself type policies have massive cash value even in the first year, unlike old fashioned whole life, like our parents might have had. So massive cash value means 8 to 40 times as much cash as the old fashioned stuff, meaning we can start using the cash value in the policy, the equity or the living benefits, they sometimes call it, the money that we can spend while we're alive. That's the most fun time to spend money, in my opinion, Laura, is while I'm alive. But, it's got a lot more cash than the old fashioned stuff. In addition to that access to cash, that liquidity that I can use as a real estate investor, it also is available to me for any other reason too. I can buy my real estate deals, but I could also send my kid to college or pay off an old debt or have a tax-free income stream in retirement. Under current law, life insurance access to cash values can be accessed, both principal and gains can be accessed income tax-free if you do it right. And again, most insurance agents just didn't even know that this existed. You really have to work with the right professional, and a bank on yourself professional is the one to work with in this case. But to bring it all the way down the ladder, you don't need a complex dynastic trust. You don't need to file with FDIC and become an actual bank. We're just setting up a whole life policy that any um, American, any U.S. citizen, any resident of the U.S. can go and open up tomorrow if they really wanted to. Does that answer your question, Laura?
Yes, definitely. And as you know, I do have a whole life policy as well, because to me, like you said, it's better to borrow while you're alive. It's better to use the
Yeah.
money while you're alive. So it gives you the best of both worlds because you can actually access to capital while you're alive, but also if something happened to you, you can also leave a legacy to your family and children. So it's like you said, there's so many things that are built into a whole life policy. And when I saw the potential of it and how I have a safety security blanket, but also I can access capital, especially as I get older, if I want to have an annuity and things like that through this policy, there is that possibility as well. So definitely. And now one of the things that I read on your questions, when you said to kind of explain why is it possible to be better than debt free. You said that sometimes, like we talk about constructive debt, but and I believe that, and I think I know the answer, but I want you to explain to our listener that sometimes it's better that to be, to have this constructive debt or to have some type of investment vehicles than being debt free. So do you want to
Sure.
elaborate on that?
Yes. Well, and it goes to my story and a number of other clients who've recently called me lately who have asked themselves, hey, I've got this debt. I've received a stimulus check from the government. Should I pay off my debt? Should I be debt free? And, it comes down to some more detail than that. You brought up a great point. If someone else is paying for your debt for you, like a renter in your apartment, built in your apartment, then maybe that's constructive debt and we shouldn't pay that off necessarily. But I'll even broaden it a little bit. When I was just getting out of college, my my plan, I guess, my strategy was going to just to be paying off my debt with cash, throwing cash at the
Mm-hmm.
debt. And if you stop and think about that, it was student loan debt, so and it was low interest, so it wasn't bad. But I was just had major payments every month. It felt like a mortgage payment, to be honest, Laura. And what we discovered was we got about halfway through the project of paying off all our debt, and we looked up and we kind of looked around after all of our hard work, running extra jobs and whatever else we could as young married couple. And all we had to show for our money was a bunch of thank you notes, thank you for your payment. Thank you for your payment. And what I didn't have was an asset earning for my future. All of the money I gave them in my mid 20s, the most, sometimes some people would say the most valuable dollar in your life is when you're at the youngest age. Why? Because a dollar today is going to grow conceivably to 10, $20, whatever in the future if you let it grow and compound. But my problem was I was sinking that money into a pit, never to see it again. Also, I would miss out on all that $1 might have grown to had I somehow saved it or invested it instead of paying off my debt. So, better than debt free means learning to build an asset even as I pay off my debt. And here's how
Right.
my wife and I finished paying off our debts. So, we got down to about halfway through our project of paying off all our student loans. And then we stumbled across this bank on yourself concept where we had a whole life contract. So, my wife and I kept paying the minimums on all of our debts. We didn't go behind on anything, but we plowed as much as we comfortably could into these policies, these high cash value, dividend paying, bank on yourself type whole life policies. And they were just flooded with cash very quickly. So we were seeing our debts come down slowly, and we were seeing our cash growing fast in our policies. And every time we had enough in our policy, you're allowed, with certain types of whole life insurance, you're allowed to borrow against the whole life and pay off the debt or invest in real estate or anything else you want to do with the money. And when you borrow against the policy, if it's from the right company, if it's designed the bank on yourself way, the policy itself, Laura, will continue to grow and compound as if there is no loan against the policy. So if the policy itself is doing middle single digit returns, nothing special, but it's nice, it beats inflation, let's say 4 or 5 or 6% after tax. That's pretty common, I find. If the policy itself is earning that kind of interest, and then I can use that money to invest in my real estate deal or pay off my debt, that's better than paying cash. That's
Right.
better than savings, right? So that's a bit about how we become better than debt free.
Right. No, definitely. And the other thing that, I like the fact is that, like you said, you're really building an asset at the same time as you're using money to build constructive debt. So it's
Yes.
really a bit of a mind shift, it's like I say, if you look at anybody that has made money in any business, real estate or any other business, they knew how to leverage. They knew how to build assets, but also to leverage, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but a lot of people are, I think, trapped in this fear, And one of the things that Warren Buffett says that I love is that risk comes from not knowing what you're doing, right?
Right.
So how can people meet their financial goals without taking unnecessary risks?
Well, that's just it. You're right. Diversification, he says, is insurance against ignorance.
Hmm.
And if you think imagine in your hand a big, maybe it's a pound of pebbles in your hand. And each of those pebbles represents another asset that you've diversified. You've got long term bonds, you've got short and mid and high yielding bonds, you've got um, emerging market stocks, you've got some real estate, you've got treasuries, you've got everything in your hand as little pebbles. And now it's our goal to throw all these pebbles through a window, meaning to achieve our goal. If I have a handful of pebbles and I launch it at a window, what's going to happen? It's going to just bounce off the window. All those pebbles are too dispersed, they're too diversified to make any difference. They won't meet my objective. However, get a same weighted rock, a singular rock weighing a pound, I'm going to throw it at the window and it's going to meet my objective. If I'm some sort of kiddo and a teenager in a bad part of town, I guess, throwing rocks through windows. But the point is true. Sometimes focus matters more than diversifying. And Warren Buffett's quote is so right, because ignorance is truly what the average American has toward their finances. But the good news is you guys listen to Laura's podcast and you have done the hard work of thinking. There's an old quote, I forget who said it, but it says 10% of people truly think. Another 10% of people think that they think. And 80% of people would rather die than think. And so you guys are listening to Laura's show. You are thinking about what you want your money to do for you. And to be honest, I'm sharing a cool concept, a cool product, a strategy that I found immensely helpful, both in paying off my debt, but now, and more importantly, in how I invest in my real estate deals. So, because it's cool to pay off my debt and still have my money earning in my policy, how much cooler when I borrow against my policy, when banks stop lending, I have infinite and permanent access to my cash value as a loan. It's written right into my contract. They cannot take that right away from me, as long as we have contract law in this country. And I can borrow against that policy and go invest in real estate. My real estate grows and appreciates. I get the rental income, I get the tax advantages of the real estate, and I get the growth and peace of mind in my policy at the exact same time. That's the one of the best keys that unlock the door in my financial life. That's the rock, the focused rock that helps me hit my financial objectives. Now,
Right.
I'd say the best thing we can do is don't take unnecessary risk. If you can have your money growing, guaranteed, and forever and compounding for the rest of your life. Buffett also says uninterrupted compound growth is one of it's Munger who says, don't ever interrupt compound growth unnecessarily. And the whole life policy lets us do that. So that's I guess my response. That's how you can grow your money and meet your financial objectives without taking unnecessary risks.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I started my whole life policy, which was several years ago before I met you. And my financial planner said, this is the type of policies, the Rolls Royce
Mm-hmm.
of anybody that wants to do financial planning, because it says, it's just like only certain people understand the value of it, unfortunately, but this is the Rolls Royce. And so that kind of stuck to me. It's like, okay, you're part of an elite group of people
Yeah.
that understand how this beneficial in so many ways. Like I'll say to like you can borrow, but there's so many things you can do. You can write into the contract. Like for me, it's long-term care, as I'm getting
Mm-hmm.
older, annuity when I reach a certain age. And so there is a lot of things that can be built on it beside borrowing against it for yourself.
That's right.
So
Mm-hmm.
for some real estate investor that is, they say, oh, wow, I never thought about this. And, a lot of investors, they might have money in IRAs or 401ks or, equity in their own house, or they have some type, or maybe they're working right now and they can get money, start some type of saving or contribution. So what would be some advice you would give to somebody in real estate that's looking maybe to build this type of vehicle to finance their real estate, but they don't know where to start?
Well, I would say don't do this just because you heard it on a podcast, even one as great as Laura's. You really want to do your own due diligence. Also, I'll caution your listeners, there are 400,000 life insurance agents in the United States. 400,000. That's one for every 900 Americans. So if you just call up your local guy or gal, odds are better than even that they don't know what you and I just talked about, Laura. And unfortunately, what they don't know can hurt you, the audience, your listeners. So you really want to work with one of the 200 elite advisors. They're called Bank on Yourself professionals who've gone through the extra training on top of their state license. These are usually CFPs like myself or attorneys, CPAs, or other financial planners who've gone through the additional training to become Bank on Yourself professionals. And that's really the very first step. Just call on, I'd be happy to speak with anyone you want to chat, who wants to chat with me from today's episode, or any Bank on Yourself professional. I'm happy to work with folks all across the country, but you could work with any Bank on Yourself professional and you'd be in good hands to know that this was set up correctly. Now, Laura, to your point, folks can start these policies with a couple $100 a month if they just got a little bit of extra cash savings. Don't do this if you cannot save. It does still mean you have to save money. This is still a whole life cash value policy, which means we're putting premium into the policy, of course. So can't do this if we're, maxing out our credit cards and that sort of thing. If folks have IRAs, 401ks, generally speaking, we cannot put life insurance inside a 401k or IRA. And there's some important reasons why, which I'll leave for another show. But the bottom line is the government gives us some special tax advantages in life insurance, and they give different tax advantages for 401ks, IRAs. And it's sort of like oil and water. You really can't mix the two together. So you got to choose. Do you want your taxes on the seed or taxes on the harvest? And for most of my listeners, most of my clients, they're looking at that seed and saying, I'll pay my taxes today so I can have a tax-free harvest in the future. And that's where most of the whole life contracts go. They're taxed on the seed as you put them in, kind of like a Roth IRA, and then it grows forever tax deferred. And under current law, you can get access to the principal and the gains with no taxes due. Absolutely like a Roth IRA in that regard. So for folks that have money in 401ks but want to do this, I'll share one little pro tip with your listeners, and then I'll hop off this soapbox, Laura, I promise. But earlier, I'm not sure when this episode will air, but in the year of 2020, until the end of this year, by the end of December 2020, there's a provision in the CARES Act that allows your listeners, any American, to take money out of a 401k or IRA if you choose, and you will have no early withdrawal penalty. That's very rare to ever have that happen, to have no early withdrawal penalty. And they won't even ask you to pay your taxes until the end of the third year from now, so 2023, really April of 24. So with that in mind, a lot of our clients have made the choice themselves of their own accord to take money out of their 401ks, put it into a whole life policy where they then spread that tax burden out over 3 years, and they have no early withdrawal penalty. Now that money is free and they can go and invest and be an active investor in real estate, take advantage of awesome things like cost segregation and other fun stuff that you can take advantage of as an investor. But you have to know this. And usually the accountants are so busy keeping up with the tax changes that they're not calling their clients to tell them about things like the CARES Act and these 401k and IRA distributions. So long answer to your question there, Laura, but there's a
Oh,
lot of
no,
ways
that's
folks can
great.
fund these.
That's great. So, just to wrap this up then, and I'm sure a lot of people have more questions and they would love to connect with somebody like you that can help them to navigate this arena. How can people get hold of you, number one? And also, I know you host a very popular podcast. So if they want to know, you talk more about different type of tax strategy and other things as well. So how people can find out more about you and also contact you and get more information about setting up this process.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a pretty fun podcast. We're over 150 episodes now at this point, and we're going through all of the not your average financial strategies. And that happens to be the name of our show, Not Your Average Financial Podcast. So just search anywhere to find that show where you listen to this show, or you can go to notyouraverageFinancialPodcast.com. And Laura, I'll just mention there's a button right there on the top of the website where folks can click request a meeting. And I or one of my associates would love to speak with you for 15, 20 minutes to answer any questions from the end of this episode if you have any left. So hopefully that helps.
Great. Well, like, this was really definitely something different to bring to my audience. So I enjoyed this today because it gives another way, as I say, to think outside the box, right?
Yeah.
And when you get into real estate, this is one of the great things about real estate. You can think outside the box, and that's how you're going to build your empire. So thanks again, Mark, for being on this interview today. I'm sure a lot of people, you open up their mind to different possibilities. And like I said, I personally have a whole life policy, so I definitely see the value in it. And please contact Mark to get more information. And don't forget to listen to his podcast because there is a lot of other good information we couldn't get through today. Thanks again. Okay.